The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Olivia Vaughn against the dusty interior wall as the driver's voice rang out through the hot California air, announcing their arrival in Reading with all the ceremony of a funeral bell tolling. She climbed down from the coach, her dark traveling dress already soaked through with sweat despite the early morning hour, and surveyed the town that would be her new home with eyes that had long ago learned not to expect much from life. At 23 years old, Olivia had already buried 2 parents, lost the family farm in Missouri to debt collectors, and spent the last of her money on passage west to take a position as a seamstress for a woman she had never met. The year was 1876, and California represented nothing more to her than a place to survive, perhaps to fade into obscurity where no one knew her or her failures. The main street of Reading stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings baking under the relentless summer sun. Dust devils danced between the structures, and the few people visible moved slowly, conserving energy in the oppressive heat. Olivia pulled her single carpetbag from the boot of the stage and stood there, uncertain, as the coach pulled away in a cloud of grit that coated her already grimy face. "Miss Vaughn," a voice called from behind her, and she turned to find a rail, thin woman with graying hair and a suspicious expression approaching. "I am Mrs. Henderson. You are late." "The stage was delayed in Sacramento," Olivia explained, her voice hoarse from days of travel and little water. "There was trouble with one of the horses." "Excuses do not sew dresses," Mrs. Henderson said sharply. "Come, you will stay in the room behind my shop. I expect you to work 6 days a week, dawn until supper. Sundays you may do as you please, though I cannot imagine there is much in this town to interest a young woman of proper breeding." Olivia followed the older woman down the street, her bag growing heavier with each step. The seamstress shop was a narrow building wedged between a general store and a lawyer's office, with a faded sign that read "Henderson Dressmaking and Alterations" hanging askew above the door. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the smell of fabric and the sharp tang of vinegar that Mrs. Henderson apparently used to clean everything. The room she was shown to was barely larger than a closet, containing a narrow cot, a small table, and a wash basin. A single window overlooked the alley behind the building, offering a view of nothing but the back wall of the building opposite. "You will take your meals with me in the kitchen," Mrs. Henderson said. "I do not tolerate tardiness, slovenliness, or visitors of any kind. Is that understood?" "Yes, madam," Olivia replied, setting down her bag and feeling the last of her hopes settle like sediment at the bottom of a murky well. Mrs. Henderson left her alone, and Olivia sank onto the cot, which creaked ominously under even her slight weight. She had expected nothing from this new life, and it seemed that was precisely what she would receive. The thought should have been comforting in its predictability, but instead, she felt only a deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the journey and everything to do with the prospect of endless gray days stretching ahead like an unpaved road leading nowhere. She did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears changed nothing and only left her with a headache and red eyes. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands in the tepid water from the basin, and presented herself to Mrs. Henderson to begin learning the particular ways her new employer expected things to be done. The afternoon passed in a blur of instruction and criticism. Mrs. Henderson found fault with the way Olivia threaded needles, how she measured fabric, the speed of her stitching, and even the way she sat at the work table. By the time the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, Olivia's back ached, her fingers were sore, and her head pounded with the effort of remembering all the rules and expectations that had been heaped upon her. "You may take a walk before supper, Mrs. Henderson announced abruptly as she covered the sewing machine with a cloth. "I need several things from the general store. Here is a list. Do not dawdle and do not speak to any men. This town is full of rough elements, and I will not have my reputation tarnished by association." Olivia took the list, and the coins Mrs. Henderson pressed into her hand, grateful for any excuse to escape the suffocating shop. She stepped out into the street, which was now busy with people finishing the day's work. Cowboys from nearby ranches rode in on tired horses, their spurs jingling as they dismounted outside the saloon. Miners with dust-caked faces shuffled toward boarding houses. A few women in respectable dresses hurried along with baskets, their eyes downcast. The general store was only a few doors down, and Olivia made her way there slowly, drinking in the sight of the town despite its rough appearance. There was a livery stable at the end of the street, a bank with iron bars on the windows, a post office, and several other establishments whose purposes were announced by hand-painted signs. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the evening light, and somewhere she could hear the sound of a river flowing. She was so absorbed in her observations that she did not notice the man stepping out of the general store until she collided with him directly. The impact knocked her backward, and she would have fallen if strong hands had not caught her arms and steadied her. "Whoa there," a deep voice said, and she looked up into a face that was all sharp angles and sun-bronzed skin, topped by a dusty hat that shaded eyes the color of creek water in summer. "You all right, miss?" "I am fine, thank you," Olivia said quickly, stepping back and feeling heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I apologize. I was not watching where I was going." The man smiled, a slow expression that transformed his serious face into something unexpectedly warm. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days working hard under the sun. His clothes were worn but clean, and a gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down the way she had heard professional gunslingers wore them. "No harm done," he assured her, tipping his hat. "I am Maxwell Donovan. Most folks call me Max. I do not believe I have seen you in Reading before." "I arrived today," Olivia said, clutching Mrs. Henderson's list like a shield. "I am working for Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress." Something flickered in Max's eyes, an expression that might have been sympathy or concern, but it passed too quickly for her to be certain. "Well then, welcome to Reading, Miss Vaughn. Olivia Vaughn." "Miss Vaughn," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound like something valuable rather than the plain collection of syllables she had always thought it. "I hope you will find Reading to your liking. It is rough around the edges, but the people are mostly good, and the land is beautiful if you know where to look." "I am not here to look at the land," Olivia said, more sharply than she intended. "I am here to work." Max's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Nothing wrong with honest work. But surely you did not come all the way to California expecting nothing more than thread and needles." The words hit something deep inside her, a place she had carefully walled off. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I came here expecting nothing at all. That way I cannot be disappointed." For a moment, Max just looked at her, his green eyes searching her face as if trying to read a map written in a language he was only beginning to understand. Then he smiled again, that slow transformation that seemed to light something in the gathering dusk. "Then everything I give you will be a beautiful surprise." Before Olivia could formulate a response to such a strange statement, he tipped his hat again and walked away, his boots leaving small clouds of dust with each step. She stood there, watching him go, feeling oddly unsettled by the brief encounter. She did not know what to make of Maxwell Donovan or his cryptic words. They sounded like the kind of empty promise that men made to women they wanted to impress, the sort of thing that meant nothing and led nowhere. Shaking off the strange feeling, she entered the general store and purchased the items on Mrs. Henderson's list. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, was friendly enough, making small talk about the weather and the town as he wrapped her purchases in brown paper. She paid with the coins Mrs. Henderson had given her and made her way back to the shop as the last light faded from the sky. Supper was a silent affair, eaten at a small table in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, while the older woman lectured about the proper behavior expected of young ladies in general and her employees in particular. Olivia ate the simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken without tasting it, her mind still circling back to the encounter with Maxwell Donovan, despite her best efforts to dismiss it as meaningless. That night, lying on her narrow cot in the sweltering room, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had meant. Everything he gave her would be a surprise. They were strangers who had exchanged perhaps a dozen sentences. They would likely never speak again. And yet something about the certainty in his voice, the way he had looked at her as if he could see past the dusty travel dress and exhausted expression to something worth noticing, lingered in her mind like the echo of a song she could not quite remember. She fell asleep telling herself it did not matter, that she had no business thinking about strange cowboys with green eyes and cryptic promises, that she had come to Reading to work and nothing more. But her dreams that night were full of surprises. The next morning began before dawn, just as Mrs. Henderson had promised. Olivia dressed in the dim light, splashed cold water on her face, and presented herself in the shop ready to work. The day passed much like the previous afternoon, full of exacting tasks and constant criticism. Mrs. Henderson, it seemed, would accept nothing less than perfection, and even perfection was only grudgingly acknowledged. By midday, Olivia's fingers were cramping from the delicate work of embroidering a collar for one of the town's wealthier residents. She was bent over the fabric, squinting in the inadequate light, when the bell over the shop door jangled. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," a familiar deep voice said, and Olivia looked up to find Maxwell Donovan standing in the doorway, hat in hand, ducking slightly to avoid hitting his head on the frame. "Mr. Donovan," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone marginally less frigid than usual. "I was not expecting you. Is there something you require?" "Actually, I came to speak with Miss Vaughn if she can be spared for a moment," Max said, his gaze finding Olivia where she sat at the work table. Mrs. Henderson's expression went from cool to glacial. "Miss Vaughn is working. Whatever business you have with her can wait until Sunday, her day off." "It will only take a moment," Max said, his voice remaining pleasant but taking on an edge of determination. "And it concerns a business matter that might benefit your establishment." This caught Mrs. Henderson's interest despite her obvious disapproval. "What sort of business matter?" Max pulled something from the satchel he carried and held it up. It was a shirt, or what remained of one, so torn and worn that it was barely holding together. "My shirts are in desperate need of replacement, and I heard that Miss Vaughn is an excellent seamstress. I am willing to pay well for several new ones, but I would need them completed within the next 2 weeks, as I will be leaving on a cattle drive to Sacramento." It was a complete fabrication. Olivia could see that immediately in the way his eyes met hers with a hint of mischief. The shirt he held might have been damaged, but no one would commission new shirts only 2 weeks before a long journey when there would be no time to break them in properly. And how would he know anything about her sewing skills when they had only met the previous evening, but Mrs. Henderson's eyes had lit up at the mention of payment. "How many shirts?" "4, I think. Perhaps 5 if the price is reasonable." "That would be $5, Mrs. Henderson said quickly. It was highway robbery for simple work shirts, and everyone in the room knew it, but Max did not even blink. $5 it is. But I will need to be measured, and I have some particular requirements about the fit and style. Would Miss Vaughn be able to step outside and take my measurements? I promised to have her back to work within 10 minutes. Mrs. Henderson's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, her greed warring with her strict sense of propriety. Greed won. "Very well. But 10 minutes only, Miss Vaughn. And you will conduct your business on the boardwalk where you can be seen." Olivia set down her embroidery and retrieved the measuring tape from the supply cabinet, her hands trembling slightly, though she could not have said whether it was from nervousness or excitement. She followed Max outside into the bright midday sun, where the street was busy with wagons and pedestrians. "You did not come here about shirts," she said quietly once they were standing on the boardwalk. Max grinned, and it was such a boyish expression that it knocked years off his appearance, making him look younger than the 30 or so years she had guessed him to be. "No, I did not. But Mrs. Henderson does not need to know that. I saw you through the window, looking like a prisoner in a cell, and I thought you might appreciate a few minutes of fresh air and conversation." "That was kind of you," Olivia said, not sure how to feel about this strange act of consideration from a man who was essentially a stranger. "But now you are obligated to purchase 5 shirts you do not need." "Who says I do not need them?" Max countered, pulling off his vest and standing before her in just his shirt and pants. "Go ahead and measure me. We should at least make it look convincing." Olivia hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward with the measuring tape. It was the first time she had been this close to him in full light, and she could see details she had missed the previous evening. There was a scar along his jawline, faded to white with age. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work. His eyes, which she had thought were simply green, actually held flecks of gold that caught the sunlight. "Lift your arms," she instructed, trying to sound professional as she measured across his shoulders. Even through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath, the warmth of his body in the hot afternoon air. "So tell me, Miss Vaughn," Max said as she worked, "what brought you all the way from Missouri to California?" She glanced up sharply. "How did you know I was from Missouri? The way you talk," he said with a slight shrug. "I have an ear for accents. Spent some time in Missouri myself years back. Beautiful country, especially in spring." "I suppose it is," Olivia said, measuring the length of his arm from shoulder to wrist. "Though I confess, I remember more the work of keeping a farm running than the beauty of the landscape. Your family had a farm. My parents did. They died 2 years ago within 6 months of each other. Influenza took my mother, and my father's heart gave out from grief, I think, as much as from the physical strain of trying to keep things going alone. The bank took the land, and I had nothing left. A friend wrote to me about the position here with Mrs. Henderson. So here I am." She had not meant to say so much, to reveal so much of her history to this stranger. But something about Max's quiet attention invited confidence, made her want to fill the silence with words. "I am sorry about your parents," Max said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "That is a heavy burden for someone so young to carry alone." "I am not so young," Olivia said, measuring around his chest and trying not to think about how close she was standing to him, how she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "I am 23. Old enough to know that life does not care about fair or unfair. It simply is." That is a grim philosophy for someone who should be thinking about dances and courting and all the things young women are supposed to dream about. Olivia stepped back, her measurements complete. I gave up dreaming a long time ago, Mr. Donovan. Dreams are for people who have the luxury of hope. I have work and shelter and enough to eat. That is more than many can say. Max was quiet for a moment, studying her with those disconcerting green-gold eyes. Then he said, "What if I told you that I meant what I said yesterday? That I intend to prove to you that expecting nothing is the saddest way to live, and that surprises, beautiful surprises, are possible even here in dusty Redding, California." "I would say you are wasting your time," Olivia replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "I am not a charity case in need of rescue by a knight in shining armor. I am simply a seamstress trying to make a living." "I never said anything about rescue," Max said, settling his vest back on his shoulders. "And I am certainly no knight. Just a cowboy with a little time and money to spare, and an inclination to prove a point to a woman who has forgotten how to hope." Before Olivia could respond, he pulled several coins from his pocket and pressed them into her hand, closing her fingers around them. "For the shirts. I will come back for a fitting next week. In the meantime, I have something for you." From his satchel, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. He handed it to her before she could protest. "Open it later when you are alone. And Miss Vaughn, try to remember that expecting nothing might protect your heart from disappointment, but it also robs you of the joy of anticipation. Sometimes the risk is worth it." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Olivia standing on the boardwalk holding his money in one hand and the mysterious package in the other, feeling more confused than she had felt in years. Mrs. Henderson was waiting inside, her expression hungry with curiosity. "Well, did you get his measurements?" "Yes, madam," Olivia said, handing over the coins. "He would like 5 shirts, simple work shirts with reinforced stitching at the shoulders and cuffs. He will return next week for a fitting." Mrs. Henderson counted the money twice, a look of satisfaction spreading across her thin face. "Very good. You will begin work on them this afternoon, and Miss Vaughn, I trust Mr. Donovan was a perfect gentleman." "Yes, madam, entirely proper. See that you remember your place." Mr. Donovan is from one of the established ranching families in this area. The Donovans own a large spread about 10 miles north of town. They are respectable people, and you would do well not to get any foolish ideas above your station. Olivia felt a flare of irritation at the implication, but kept her expression neutral. "I have no ideas at all, Mrs. Henderson. As I said, I am here to work." She returned to her embroidery, but her mind was not on the delicate stitches. The package Max had given her seemed to burn through the pocket of her dress where she had hidden it, and she counted the hours until she could retreat to her small room and discover what he had given her. When evening finally came and Mrs. Henderson dismissed her for the night, Olivia barely touched her supper before excusing herself. In the privacy of her room, with the door firmly closed, she sat on the edge of her cot and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a book. Not a new book, but one that had been well loved, its cover worn smooth by many readings. The title, embossed in faded gold letters, read Poems of Hope and Wonder. A piece of paper fell out when she opened it, and she unfolded it to find a message written in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Miss Vaughn, I found this in the general store and thought of you. Perhaps you might find within these pages a reason to reconsider your stance on dreams and expectations. The poem on page 47 is my favorite. M.D." Olivia turned to page 47 and found a poem about spring coming to a winter barren land. about hope rising like green shoots through frozen ground, about the miracle of rebirth and renewal. She read it once, then again, and found to her great surprise that her eyes were stinging with unshed tears. No one had given her a gift in years. No one had thought about what might bring her joy or comfort. The book was not expensive, probably cost no more than $1, but it might as well have been made of gold for what it represented. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, and cared enough to offer this small gesture of kindness. She pressed the book to her chest and let herself cry, quiet tears that soaked into the worn fabric of her dress. They were not tears of sadness, exactly, or even of joy. They were tears of something breaking open inside her, some frozen place that had been sealed shut for so long she had forgotten it existed. When the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter somehow, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying so long it had become part of her. She wiped her eyes, lit the small lamp on her table, and began to read from the beginning of the book, losing herself in verses about beauty and wonder and the resilience of the human spirit. It was well past midnight when she finally set the book aside and blew out the lamp, but she fell asleep with something she had not felt in years stirring in her chest. It felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. The next few days fell into a rhythm. She worked long hours in Mrs. Henderson's shop, creating the shirts for Max and attending to the endless alterations and new garments that comprised the bulk of the business. But now, instead of the hours dragging by in gray monotony, she found herself looking forward to the evenings when she could retreat to her room and read from the book of poetry, each verse opening small windows in the walls she had built around her heart. On Sunday, her day off, Mrs. Henderson informed her that she was free to do as she pleased as long as she was back by evening and caused no scandal. Olivia put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean and relatively unwrinkled, and ventured out into Reading with no particular destination in mind. The town looked different on Sunday. Most of the businesses were closed, and people moved at a more leisurely pace, many dressed in their church clothes heading to or from services. Olivia had no desire to sit in a church pew and be stared at by curious strangers, so instead she walked toward the edge of town, following the sound of running water until she found the river. It was not a large river, especially not this late in summer when the water ran low, but it was beautiful in its own way. Cottonwood trees lined the banks, providing blessed shade, and the water flowed over smooth stones with a musical sound that soothed something deep in her soul. She found a flat rock near the water's edge and sat down, removing her shoes and stockings to dip her feet in the cool current. She was so absorbed in the simple pleasure of the cold water on her dusty feet that she did not hear the approaching footsteps until a familiar voice said, "I had a feeling I might find you here." Olivia looked up to find Max standing a few feet away, his horse grazing peacefully on the grass behind him. He had traded his work clothes for slightly better garments, and she realized he must have attended church in town. "How did you know where to look?" she asked, too surprised to be properly cautious. "There are only so many places a person can go in Reading on a Sunday," Max said with a slight smile. "And you do not strike me as someone who enjoys crowds. The river seemed like a logical guess." He gestured to the rock beside her. "May I join you?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded. She knew she should probably be more careful about her reputation, but the truth was she had no reputation to protect, and the prospect of spending her only day off entirely alone had less appeal than it once might have. Max sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them, and removed his own boots and socks to put his feet in the water. "This is my favorite spot in the whole county," he said, looking out over the flowing river. "I have been coming here since I was a boy. My father used to bring me fishing, back before he got too busy with the ranch to spare the time." "The Donovans have been here a long time then?" Olivia asked. "My father came out in '52 during the gold rush. He did not find much gold, but he found land and water and realized that in California, those were worth more than any mineral you could pan from a stream. He built the ranch up from nothing, working as a hand for other outfits until he saved enough to buy his own place. Now we run about 500 head of cattle and supply beef to most of Northern California. That is quite an accomplishment." "It is," Max agreed, "though it comes with its own burdens. My father expects me to take over the ranch eventually, to marry some appropriate woman from a good family and produce heirs to carry on the Donovan name." He said it with a trace of bitterness that surprised her. "But that is not what you want." Max was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past. "I want the ranch. I love the land, love the work. But I do not want to marry someone just because she comes from the right family or has the right connections. I want to marry someone I actually care about, someone real and honest who is not playing games or trying to get her hands on Donovan money." He glanced at her. "Does that sound foolish?" "No," Olivia said softly. "It sounds like you have more sense than most men I have known." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the rushing water and the occasional call of a bird in the trees. Finally, Olivia said, "Thank you for the book. It was very kind of you. You are welcome. Have you been reading it every night?" "Some of the poems I have read 3 or 4 times." She paused, then added, "The one on page 47 is my favorite too." Max turned to look at her fully, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was something in his eyes that was both tender and intense, an emotion she could not quite name, but that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I am glad," he said simply. "Why are you doing this?" Olivia asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "We are strangers." "You owe me nothing. Why go to the trouble of books and conversation and seeking me out on my day off?" Max considered the question seriously. "Do you remember what you said when we first met, that you came here expecting nothing?" "Yes. Those words have haunted me. I have thought about them every day since you said them. What must it be like, I kept wondering, to go through life expecting nothing, to have given up on the possibility of joy or surprise or wonder? It seemed to me like the saddest thing I could imagine." He reached over and very gently took her hand. "And then I thought, what if I could show you that you were wrong? What if I could prove to you that beautiful surprises are possible, that life can be more than just work and survival?" Olivia looked down at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused, hers pale and marked with needle pricks. "But why would you care? Why would it matter to you what some seamstress from Missouri believes about life?" "Because," Max said, his voice low and earnest, "from the moment I saw you standing on that boardwalk, dusty and tired and still holding your head high with a kind of quiet dignity that took my breath away, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because when I look into your eyes, I see someone who has been beaten down by life but has refused to be broken, and that kind of strength deserves to be celebrated, not hidden away in a dark shop stitching clothes for people who will never appreciate the person creating them." He paused, then added with a self-deprecating smile, "And because I am half in love with you already, and I want to see if you might consider giving me a chance to court you properly." The world seemed to stop. The river ceased flowing, the birds stopped singing, and all Olivia could hear was the thundering of her own heart. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I am completely serious. I know it is fast. I know we have only just met. But I am 31 years old, Miss Vaughn. I have known my share of women, and I have never felt this way about any of them. There is something about you that calls to me, that makes me want to be better, to do better. I would be honored if you would let me court you." Olivia felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at deep water. She could step back to safety, to the predictable gray existence she had planned for herself. Or she could jump and trust that the water would catch her, that the fall might be terrifying but the landing might be worth it. "I have nothing to offer you," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own fear. "No money, no family, no connections. Mrs. Henderson pays me a pittance, and I own exactly 3 dresses and 1 pair of shoes that are not falling apart. You are from an established family with land and money. What could you possibly want with someone like me?" "Everything," Max said simply. "I want your sharp mind and your determination. I want to hear your thoughts on poetry and watch you smile when you discover something beautiful. I want to give you reasons to hope, to dream, to expect wonderful things from life. I want to prove to you that you are worth so much more than you think you are." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I do not know if I remember how to hope. I do not know if I can be what you think I am." "You do not have to be anything except yourself," Max assured her, reaching up to gently brush away her tears with his thumb. "That is more than enough, more than I ever dared hope to find." "This is madness," Olivia said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Complete madness." "Then let us be mad together," Max said. "What do you say, Miss Vaughn? Will you let me court you? Will you give me a chance to fill your life with beautiful surprises?" Olivia thought about the years of gray existence she had endured, the walls she had built around her heart, the determined resignation with which she had approached her new life in Reading. And then she thought about poetry books and kind words, and the way Max looked at her as if she was something precious and rare. The choice, she realized, was not really a choice at all. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with something that felt dangerously like joy. "Yes, I will let you court me." Max's face lit up with a smile so bright it rivaled the sun, and he squeezed her hand gently. "You will not regret this, I promise you." "I am already regretting it a little," Olivia said, but she was smiling too, feeling lighter than she had felt in years. "Mrs. Henderson is going to be furious." "Mrs. Henderson can be as furious as she likes," Max said cheerfully. "You are not her property. You have every right to be courted by a respectable man with honorable intentions." They sat by the river for the rest of the afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. Max told her about the ranch, about his childhood in California, about his dreams for the future. Olivia found herself sharing stories she had not thought about in years, memories of her parents and the farm, small moments of beauty she had witnessed and tucked away in her heart like pressed flowers in a book. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Max walked her back to town, leading his horse by the reins. They moved slowly, neither wanting the day to end, stealing a few more moments of conversation. At the door to Mrs. Henderson's shop, Max took both of Olivia's hands in his and said, "I know you have to work during the week, but may I call on you next Sunday? Perhaps we could have a picnic by the river if the weather holds." "I would like that," Olivia said, and realized with a start that she meant it completely. She was looking forward to something, anticipating it with pleasure rather than dread. It was such a foreign feeling that it took her a moment to identify it. Max must have seen something of her realization in her face, because he smiled and leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, Miss Vaughn. Dream of beautiful surprises." Then he was gone, riding away into the gathering dusk, and Olivia stood watching until he disappeared from view. She touched her forehead where his lips had been, feeling the lingering warmth, and allowed herself to smile. Inside, Mrs. Henderson was waiting with a face like a thundercloud. "You were seen, Miss Vaughn. Multiple people came to inform me that you were down by the river with Maxwell Donovan, behaving in a manner that was entirely too familiar for a young woman of proper breeding." "We were sitting by the river talking," Olivia said calmly. "Mr. Donovan has asked permission to court me, and I have accepted. We did nothing improper." "Court you?" Mrs. Henderson's voice rose to a near screech. "Maxwell Donovan wants to court you. This is unacceptable. It is a recipe for disaster. He will trifle with you and discard you, and your reputation will be ruined. I will not allow it." "With all due respect, Mrs. Henderson," Olivia said, feeling a core of steel in her spine that had been missing for too long, "you are my employer, not my guardian. You have no authority to allow or forbid my personal associations as long as they do not interfere with my work." Mrs. Henderson's face turned an alarming shade of red. "If you pursue this foolishness, you will find yourself without employment, Miss Vaughn. I will not have my establishment associated with scandal." "Then I suppose you will have to decide which is more important to you," Olivia said quietly. "Your moral outrage or the extra income from the work I do. But I should warn you that Mr. Donovan is having 5 shirts made, and he paid in advance. I imagine he would want his money back if I am unable to complete them." It was a calculated risk, and for a moment Olivia thought she had overplayed her hand. But then Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from rage to calculation. "You will continue with your work, but I expect absolute discretion. Any hint of impropriety and you will be out on the street. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, madam." Olivia escaped to her room feeling shaken but triumphant. She had stood up for herself, claimed the right to pursue happiness, and survived the confrontation. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. That night, she read poetry until her lamp ran out of oil, marking passages that spoke to her newly awakened heart, and fell asleep with a smile on her face. The week that followed was one of the strangest of Olivia's life. She worked diligently on Max's shirts and the other commissions, her fingers flying over the fabric with practiced ease. But now, instead of losing herself in the monotony of the work, she found her mind wandering to thoughts of Sunday, to the prospect of seeing Max again, to the unfolding possibility of something she had thought forever lost to her. Max did not come to the shop again that week, respecting the boundaries of propriety, but he found ways to remind her that he was thinking of her. On Tuesday, a boy delivered a small bouquet of wildflowers with a note that read simply, "Saw these and thought of you. M.D." On Thursday, the same boy brought a basket of fresh peaches from the Donovan Ranch with another note. "These are from our orchard. I hope they are as sweet as the thought of seeing you again." Each gift was small, simple, and perfect. Olivia ate the peaches slowly, savoring every bite, and pressed one of the wildflowers between the pages of her poetry book to preserve it. She felt like a girl again, experiencing the first flush of romance, and the feeling was both terrifying and wonderful. Mrs. Henderson noticed the gifts and said nothing, but her disapproval hung in the air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Olivia ignored it as best she could, focusing on her work and counting down the days until Sunday. When Sunday finally arrived, she woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. She washed carefully in the cold water from her basin, braided her hair in the style she thought looked best, and put on her blue dress, wishing desperately that she had something finer to wear. But Max had said she did not need to be anything except herself, so herself was what she would be. He arrived at mid-morning, riding a beautiful chestnut mare and leading a second, gentler horse. "I thought we might ride out to a special place I know," he said, dismounting and offering his hand to help her up. It is about an hour from town, but the view is worth the journey. Do you ride? I grew up on a farm, Olivia reminded him with a smile. I have been riding since I was 6 years old. Good. This is Rosie. She is the gentlest horse we have, perfect for a lady. Olivia stroked the mare's soft nose and swung up into the saddle with an ease that clearly surprised Max. Where are we going? You will see, he said mysteriously, mounting his own horse. Trust me, I am trying to, Olivia admitted, and they rode out of town together into the golden California morning. The landscape around Redding was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in dry grass gave way to rocky outcroppings and stands of oak and pine. The air smelled of dust and sage, and the sun beat down relentlessly, even as the morning wore on. But there was a stark grandeur to the land that appealed to something in Olivia's soul, a sense of space and freedom that she had never experienced in the gentler, greener landscape of Missouri. Max led them along a trail that wound up into the foothills of the mountains, climbing steadily until Olivia's legs ached from gripping the saddle. Just when she was about to ask how much farther they had to go, they crested a ridge and the world opened up before them. The view was breathtaking. They could see for miles in every direction. The town of Redding far below looking like a child's toy, the river winding through the valley like a silver ribbon, the mountains rising in purple majesty on all sides. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and hawks circled lazily on thermal currents, their cries echoing off the rocks. Max, Olivia breathed, this is incredible. I thought you might like it, he said with obvious pleasure at her reaction. This is Donovan land, the northern boundary of the ranch. I come up here when I need to think, when the world gets too small and crowded. He dismounted and helped her down, then spread a blanket in the shade of an old oak tree. I brought lunch. Nothing fancy, just bread and cheese and some of those peaches, but I figured we could enjoy it while we talk. They settled on the blanket, and Olivia accepted the food he offered, eating more than she had intended because the ride and the fresh air had made her ravenously hungry. They talked easily, the conversation flowing between them like the river far below. Max asked about her childhood, and she found herself sharing memories she had buried deep, both good and bad. He told her about growing up with the weight of his father's expectations, about feeling caught between love for his family and the desire to forge his own path. My father wants me to marry Elizabeth Pritchard, Max said, lying back on the blanket and staring up at the sky through the oak leaves. Her father owns the ranch that borders ours to the east. It would be a strategic alliance, joining two of the largest properties in the county. Olivia felt her stomach clench. And do you want to marry her? God, no, Max said with feeling. Elizabeth is beautiful and educated and probably perfectly nice, but we have nothing in common. Every conversation with her is like pulling teeth. She thinks ranching is dirty work that should be left to hired hands, and she spends most of her time planning trips to San Francisco so she can attend parties and wear fancy dresses. There is nothing wrong with that, but it is not the life I want. What life do you want? Olivia asked softly. Max turned his head to look at her. I want a partner, not an ornament. I want someone who will ride out with me to check on the cattle, who will not mind getting her hands dirty, who can talk to me about things that matter. I want someone I can respect as much as I love, someone real and honest and strong. He reached over and took her hand. I want someone like you, Olivia. Hearing him use her given name sent a thrill through her. Your father will not approve. My father does not get to choose who I love, Max said firmly. I respect him, but I will not live my life according to his plans. I am old enough to make my own decisions. But I have nothing, Olivia protested. No dowry, no connections, nothing that would benefit your family or your ranch. Choosing me would be choosing hardship and conflict with your father. Choosing you would be choosing happiness, Max countered, sitting up and turning to face her fully. Do you not understand, Olivia? You are not nothing. You are everything I have been looking for. Your strength, your resilience, your quiet dignity, the way you see beauty even after life has tried to crush it out of you. That is worth more than all the strategic alliances in California. Olivia felt tears threatening again, that strange mixture of joy and fear that seemed to accompany every moment with this man who insisted on seeing value where she had learned to see only lack. I am afraid, she admitted. I am afraid to hope, afraid to believe this is real, afraid that I will wake up and discover it was all a dream. Max cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. Then let me be brave enough for both of us. Let me prove to you day by day, moment by moment, that this is real. That you deserve every beautiful surprise, every moment of joy, every bit of love that I can give you. Max, she whispered, and then he was kissing her, a gentle pressure of lips that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had secretly dreamed a kiss could be, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Max rested his forehead against hers. I am going to marry you, Olivia Vaughn. I decided that the moment you told me you expected nothing from life. I am going to spend the rest of my days proving you wrong, filling your world with so many beautiful surprises that you forget what it feels like to expect nothing. You are insane, Olivia said, but she was smiling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Completely insane. Then marry me anyway, Max said. Marry me and let me be insane for you every day for the rest of our lives. We have known each other less than 2 weeks, Olivia pointed out, trying to be the voice of reason even though her heart was singing yes, yes, yes. I do not need 2 years to know what I learned in 2 minutes, Max said. But if you need time, I will give you time. Court you properly, let you get to know me, prove that this is not some passing fancy. Just promise me you will not give up on us, before we have had a chance to see where it leads. Olivia looked into his green-gold eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope, and a love so fierce it took her breath away. I promise, she said. I promise I will give us a chance. They spent the rest of the afternoon on that ridge, talking and laughing and sharing stories, occasionally falling into comfortable silences where words were not needed. Max pointed out landmarks in the distance, told her about the history of the region, shared his dreams for the ranch and the life he wanted to build. Olivia found herself sharing her own dreams, small things she had barely admitted to herself. A garden full of flowers, a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread, children laughing in a sun-filled yard. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they reluctantly packed up the remains of their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back to town. This time, Max reached over and took her hand as they rode side by side down the trail, and Olivia led him, feeling the calluses on his palm against her own and thinking that she had never been happier than she was in this moment. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Max called on Olivia every Sunday, always with a new surprise. A ride to a different beautiful location, a picnic lunch with some special treat, a small gift that showed he had been thinking of her during the week. During the week itself, he found excuses to come into town, stopping by the shop on invented errands just to see her face and exchange a few words under Mrs. Henderson's disapproving glare. The townspeople noticed, of course. In a place as small as Redding, nothing went unobserved. Olivia became the subject of gossip, some of it kind, much of it speculative and vaguely cruel. The story went that Maxwell Donovan, one of the most eligible bachelors in the county, was courting a nobody seamstress from Missouri who had nothing to recommend her except a pretty face and calculated charms. Olivia tried to ignore the whispers and the stares, but they wore on her. She was not used to being the center of attention, and the speculation about her motives and character stung more than she wanted to admit. Max, when she mentioned it, just shrugged and said that small minds would always find something to gossip about, and their opinion did not matter. But it did matter when the gossip reached the ears of Max's father. Almost 2 months after their courtship began, Max arrived at their usual Sunday meeting place with a grim expression that immediately set Olivia on edge. "What is wrong?" she asked as soon as she saw his face. "My father wants to meet you," Max said. "He heard about us from someone in town, and he is not pleased. He has demanded that I bring you to the ranch for Sunday dinner next week." Olivia felt her stomach drop. "He wants to intimidate me, to show me that I do not belong in your world." "Probably," Max admitted. "But I told him that if he cannot treat you with respect, he will lose his son as well as the chance to meet the woman I intend to marry." "You told him that?" Olivia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I did. And I meant it, Olivia. My father is important to me, but you are more important. If he cannot see how extraordinary you are, that is his failing, not yours." "But what if I am not strong enough?" Olivia asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I cannot stand up to his disapproval? What if I embarrass you? What if I prove that everyone is right and I do not belong with you?" Max pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath her ear. "You are the strongest person I know. You have survived things that would have broken other people. You stood up to Mrs. Henderson. You took a chance on us when it would have been safer to push me away. You can handle meeting my father." "But what if he is right?" Olivia said into his shirt. "What if I am reaching above my station? What if this ends badly?" "Then we will handle it together," Max said firmly, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You are not alone anymore, Olivia. Whatever happens, whatever challenges we face them together. That is what partnership means. That is what love means." The word hung in the air between them. Love. They had been dancing around it for weeks, feeling it grow between them like a living thing, but neither had spoken it aloud until now. "I love you," Max said, making it real, making it undeniable. "I love your strength and your courage and the way you see the world. I love how you look when you are reading poetry and how you laugh when something genuinely surprises you. I love the way you have opened yourself to hope, despite everything life has done to teach you otherwise. I love you, Olivia Vaughn, and I do not care who knows it or who disapproves." Olivia felt like she was falling, tumbling through space with no idea where she would land. But instead of fear, she felt only a wild, soaring joy. "I love you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I did not think I could, did not think I had it in me anymore, but I love you, Max Donovan. You have given me beautiful surprises every day, just like you promised, but the most beautiful surprise of all was discovering that my heart was not as dead as I thought it was." They kissed then, there in the shade of the trees by the river, a kiss that was different from the careful, gentle ones they had shared before. This was a kiss of claiming and promise, of passion and commitment, of two people deciding to bind their lives together regardless of what obstacles stood in their way. When they finally broke apart, Max was smiling, that slow, warm smile that transformed his face. "So you will come to dinner at the ranch. You will let me introduce you to my family." "Yes," Olivia said, squaring her shoulders. "Yes, I will. And if your father tries to intimidate me, he will discover that seamstresses from Missouri are tougher than they look." Max laughed, the sound full of delight and pride. "That is my girl. He will not know what hit him." The week leading up to the dinner was one of the most stressful of Olivia's life. She worked on Max's shirts with trembling fingers, agonized over what to wear, and barely slept, her mind spinning with anxious thoughts about what awaited her at the Donovan ranch. Max had told her not to worry, that his father's bark was worse than his bite, but she knew that the meeting could determine their entire future together. Mrs. Henderson, who had heard about the upcoming dinner through the town's gossip network, was in a strange state of excitement and disapproval. On one hand, she seemed to think it was fitting that Olivia would be humiliated and put in her place. On the other, she clearly wanted to bask in the reflected glory if somehow the impossible happened, and the relationship was accepted by the Donovan family. "You should wear your brown dress," she said on Saturday evening, eyeing Olivia critically. "It is the most respectable thing you own, and put your hair up properly. None of those loose styles that young women favor these days. You want to look like a serious person, not some flighty girl." Olivia bit back a sharp retort and simply nodded. She had already decided to wear her blue dress, the one Max had told her he liked, but there was no point in arguing with Mrs. Henderson about it. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day where the sun felt like a physical weight pressing down from above. Olivia dressed carefully, braiding her hair in a crown around her head and pinning it securely. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror that hung on her wall, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked nervous and determined and perhaps a little bit hopeful, and she wondered when she had stopped being the resigned, defeated person who had arrived in Reading 3 months ago. Max called for her in a buggy rather than on horseback, explaining that the dress she was wearing was too impractical for riding, and he wanted her to arrive in comfort and style. He himself was dressed more formally than she had ever seen him, in a white shirt with a string tie and dark pants that looked freshly pressed. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw her, his eyes lighting up in a way that made her believe him despite her own doubts. "You look handsome," she replied, allowing him to help her up into the buggy. "And nervous." "I would be lying if I said I was not worried," Max admitted as they drove out of town. "My father can be stubborn and set in his ways, but I also know that he loves me and wants me to be happy. Once he sees how happy you make me, I think he will come around." The ride to the ranch took about 30 minutes, following a well-maintained road that wound through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. Olivia could see why Max loved this land. There was something majestic about it, a sense of possibility in the wide open spaces under the vast sky. The ranch house, when it came into view, was larger than Olivia had expected. A sprawling 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There were several outbuildings nearby, including a large barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various sheds and corrals. Everything looked well-maintained and prosperous, the result of years of hard work and success. Max helped her down from the buggy and offered his arm. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No," Olivia admitted, "but let us do this anyway." They climbed the steps to the porch together, and before Max could knock, the front door swung open to reveal a tall, gray-haired man with weathered features and the same green-gold eyes as his son. Marcus Donovan was an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and straight-backed despite what must have been close to 60 years of age. He looked at Olivia with an expression that was not quite hostile but certainly not welcoming. "So this is her," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Father, this is Miss Olivia Vaughn," Max said formally. Olivia, my father, Marcus Donovan. Olivia dropped a small curtsy as she had been taught as a girl and met Marcus Donovan's eyes directly. Mr. Donovan, thank you for inviting me to your home. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he had expected her to be intimidated and was surprised by her composure. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Dinner is nearly ready. The interior of the ranch house was comfortable without being ostentatious. The furniture was solid and well made, the floors were clean, and there were personal touches everywhere. Family photographs on the walls, books stacked on tables, a woman's embroidered sampler hung over the fireplace. It looked like a home where people actually lived, not a showplace designed to impress. A woman emerged from what Olivia guessed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 45, with a kind face and dark hair streaked with gray. You must be Miss Vaughn, she said warmly, and Olivia felt some of her tension ease. I am Margaret, the Donovan housekeeper. I have been keeping house for Mr. Donovan and Max since Max's mother passed away 8 years ago. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Margaret, Olivia said. Just Margaret, the housekeeper corrected with a smile. Mrs. Margaret makes me sound like someone's grandmother. Now, dinner is ready if everyone would like to come to the table. The dining room was dominated by a large wooden table that could easily seat 12. Today it was set for just 4, with Marcus at the head, Max and Olivia on one side, and Margaret taking the 4th chair at Marcus's insistence. Apparently, she was more than just a housekeeper. She was family. The meal was excellent. Roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread, and a berry pie for dessert. For the first part of the meal, conversation was general, talk of the ranch, the cattle, the weather, and the state of the markets. Olivia said little, focusing on her food and observing the dynamics between father and son. It was clear that Max and Marcus had a complicated relationship. There was love there, but also tension, the push and pull of a son trying to establish his independence, and a father struggling to let go of control. They disagreed about ranch management, about politics, about nearly everything. But they did so with a kind of rough affection that suggested these disagreements were familiar territory. Finally, as Margaret cleared the main course and brought out the pie, Marcus turned his attention fully to Olivia. So, Miss Vaughn, my son tells me you are from Missouri originally. What brings you to California? Here it was. The interrogation. Olivia set down her fork and met his gaze squarely. My parents died 2 years ago and I lost our family farm to debt. I came west to start over, to find work and make a new life for myself. And you work for Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress. Yes, sir, I make dresses and do alterations. That is hard work for little pay, I imagine. It is honest work, Olivia said calmly. I do not mind hard labor, and Mrs. Henderson is teaching me the business side of things as well as the practical skills. And now my son is courting you, Marcus said bluntly. You must understand why I am concerned about this. Father, Max said warningly, but Olivia laid a hand on his arm. It is all right, she said. Then to Marcus. Yes, sir, I understand completely. You think I am after your son's money, that I am using my circumstances to trap him into a marriage that would benefit me greatly and cost your family dearly. Marcus looked taken aback by her directness, but nodded slowly. That thought has crossed my mind. I cannot prove to you that I am not that person, Olivia said. There is no way to demonstrate the sincerity of my feelings in a single conversation over dinner. All I can tell you is that when I arrived in Redding, I expected nothing from life except work and survival. I had given up on hope, on dreams, on the possibility of happiness. Your son changed that, not with money or gifts or promises of an easy life, but by seeing me as a person of value when I had forgotten I had any value at all. I love Max because he is kind and good and because he challenged me to believe that I deserved more than the gray existence I had resigned myself to. If you think I am not good enough for him, you are probably right. But I promise you that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of his love and to make him happy. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Margaret had tears in her eyes. Max was staring at her with an expression of such love and pride that it made her chest ache. And Marcus Donovan was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You have spirit," he said finally. "I will give you that. And you are right that I cannot judge your character in one meeting, but I will be watching, Miss Vaughn. If you hurt my son, if you prove to be the gold digger I fear you might be, you will answer to me." "Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir," Olivia said. Marcus nodded, then turned to his son. "You could do worse, I suppose, though you could certainly do better from a practical standpoint. Elizabeth Pritchard has a dowry of $10,000 and connections throughout the county." "Elizabeth Pritchard is a lovely woman who would make someone very happy," Max said, "but she would not make me happy, and I would not make her happy. Olivia is my choice, father. I hope you can respect that." Marcus sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Your mother would have liked her," he said finally, and it sounded like a concession. "She always said that what mattered in a marriage was not money or position, but whether two people could face the world together as partners." "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman," Olivia said softly. "She was," Marcus agreed, his expression softening as he remembered. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as clever. She would have told me I was a fool for judging you before I knew you, and she would have been right." He stood up from the table and extended his hand to Olivia. "Welcome to the Donovan Ranch, Miss Vaughn. I hope we will be seeing more of you." It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was acceptance of a sort, and Olivia felt her eyes sting with grateful tears as she shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I hope I can prove worthy of your son and your trust." After dinner, Max showed Olivia around the ranch while his father and Margaret cleaned up. They walked hand in hand through the golden afternoon light, past the corrals where horses dozed in the shade and out to a small family cemetery on a rise overlooking the valley. "My mother is buried here," Max said, stopping before a simple headstone that read Caroline Donovan, beloved wife and mother, 1824–1868. "She died of pneumonia the winter I turned 23. It was fast, only a few days from the first symptoms until the end. I have always thought that was a mercy that she did not have to suffer long, but it nearly destroyed my father. They loved each other deeply, and when she died, something in him died too. That is why he is so protective of you," Olivia said, understanding dawning. "He is afraid of losing you too, afraid that if you make the wrong choice, you will suffer the way he suffered." "Exactly. He wants to control things, to make sure I am safe and secure and provided for, because he could not protect the person he loved most." Max pulled Olivia close, wrapping his arms around her. "But I am not going to let fear dictate my life. I would rather have 50 years with you and face whatever challenges come than have 100 years of safe, comfortable mediocrity with someone I do not love." 50 years, Olivia repeated, testing the words. "That is a long time." "Not long enough," Max said, kissing the top of her head, "but it is a start." They stood there for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun sink lower in the sky and paint the world in shades of gold and amber. Olivia felt at peace in a way she had never felt before, as if all the broken pieces of her life had finally found a way to fit together into something whole and beautiful. "I want to marry you," Max said suddenly. "Soon. I do not want to wait." I want you to be my wife, to live here with me, to build a life together." Olivia pulled back to look at him. "Are you asking me or telling me?" "Asking," Max said quickly. "Definitely asking. Will you marry me, Olivia Vaughn? Will you take a chance on me and this life and all the beautiful surprises I want to give you?" "Yes," Olivia said, and it was the easiest answer she had ever given. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed there beside his mother's grave as the sun set over the California mountains, sealing the promise they had made to each other with a passion that spoke of all the years to come. Planning a wedding in a small town like Redding in 1876 was a relatively simple affair compared to the elaborate events that wealthy families in San Francisco or Sacramento might stage. But it still required more preparation than Olivia had anticipated. Max wanted to be married as soon as possible, and Olivia saw no reason to delay, so they settled on a date just 6 weeks after his proposal. Telling Mrs. Henderson that she would be leaving the seamstress's employment was one of the hardest conversations Olivia had ever had. Despite the woman's critical nature and strict demeanor, Olivia had come to respect her as a skilled craftswoman and capable businesswoman. She half expected Mrs. Henderson to be furious or hurt, but instead, the older woman just looked at her with a calculating expression. "I suppose you think you have won some kind of prize," she said finally. "I think I have found someone I love who loves me in return," Olivia replied carefully. "And yes, I am grateful for that, but I am also grateful to you, Mrs. Henderson. You gave me work when I had nothing, and you taught me skills that I will use for the rest of my life. I hope you will wish me well." Mrs. Henderson was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You are a skilled seamstress, Miss Vaughn, better than most I have worked with. You have a good eye for line and fit, and your stitching is nearly flawless. I will miss having you in the shop." She paused, then added grudgingly, "And I hope you will be happy." It was the closest thing to a blessing Olivia was likely to receive from her severe employer, and she accepted it with gratitude. She promised to complete all the outstanding commissions before her departure, including finishing Max's shirts, which had long since been completed, but which she had been embroidering with his initials on the cuffs as a surprise. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Margaret offered to help with the wedding planning, and to Olivia's surprise, she found in the housekeeper a warm and genuine friend. Margaret had her own story of hardship overcome. Widowed young, she had taken the position with the Donovans when Max was still a boy and had helped raise him after his mother's death. She understood what it was like to rebuild a life from nothing and offered Olivia advice and support without judgment. "Max is like a son to me," she told Olivia one afternoon as they worked on Olivia's wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk that Margaret had produced from a trunk of Caroline Donovan's old things. "I want to see him happy, and I can see that you make him happy. That is all that matters to me." "I will do my best," Olivia promised, "though I confess I am terrified of being the wife of a rancher. I know nothing about managing a household of this size, nothing about the business side of ranching, nothing about the social obligations that will be expected of me." "You will learn," Margaret assured her, "and you will not be alone. I will be here to help, and Max is not the kind of man who will expect you to know everything immediately. He is patient and kind, just like his mother was." The wedding was held on a Sunday afternoon in early October, when the worst of the summer heat had passed, but the weather was still warm and clear. They married in the small church in Redding, with most of the town in attendance out of curiosity if nothing else. Marcus gave the bride away, an honor that brought tears to Olivia's eyes, and Margaret stood up with her as matron of honor. Max's best man was a fellow rancher named James, a friend from childhood. Olivia walked down the aisle in her borrowed silk dress, which Margaret had altered to fit her perfectly, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that Max had picked himself that morning. She saw him standing at the altar in his best suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that she felt her breath catch in her throat. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives. Max slipped a simple gold band on her finger, and she placed its twin on his. And then they were married, husband and wife, and the church erupted in applause as Max kissed his bride with enthusiasm that made several of the older ladies fan themselves. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed half the county. People came from all over the area, some out of genuine happiness for the couple, others out of curiosity about the seamstress who had captured the heart of one of the most eligible bachelors in Northern California. Olivia moved through the crowd on Max's arm, accepting congratulations and well wishes, feeling like she was floating above the ground. As the sun began to set, and the party showed no signs of slowing down, Max leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Want to escape?" Olivia nodded, and they slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward the house. Max led her not to the main part of the house, but to a wing that had been newly renovated, a suite of rooms that would be their private space. "I wanted you to have your own place, somewhere that was ours and not just the house I grew up in," Max explained as he opened the door to reveal a sitting room, bedroom, and small study, all freshly painted and furnished with care. "Margaret helped me choose the colors and furniture, but if there is anything you want to change, we can." Olivia looked around the rooms that would be her new home and felt tears spring to her eyes yet again. Everything was beautiful and thoughtful, from the comfortable chairs by the fireplace to the wide bed covered in a quilt that she recognized as Margaret's handiwork, to the desk by the window where she could read and write. "It is perfect," she said. "All of it, more than I ever dreamed of having." Max pulled her close, his hands warm through the silk of her dress. "I told you I would give you beautiful surprises. This is only the beginning, Olivia. I intend to spend the rest of my life surprising you with how good things can be." They made love that night for the first time, a sweet and tender joining that was both awkward and perfect in the way of first times. Max was patient and gentle, and Olivia felt safe in his arms, safe enough to be vulnerable, safe enough to give herself completely to this man who had taught her how to hope again. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the wide bed, listening to the sounds of the celebration still going on outside, and Olivia felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful in its intensity. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Max replied, pulling her closer. "My wife." The words sent a thrill through her. Wife. She was someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's chosen person. She had arrived in Reading expecting nothing, and instead she had found everything. The first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and learning. Olivia had to adapt to life on a working ranch, which was vastly different from anything she had experienced before. The days started before dawn and often did not end until well after dark. There were meals to plan and prepare, a household to manage, and the endless work of keeping a large property running smoothly. Margaret was patient in teaching her the rhythms of ranch life, showing her how to manage the kitchen, how to deal with the ranch hands who came to the house for meals, how to keep accounts and order supplies. Olivia discovered that the skills she had learned as a seamstress translated surprisingly well to household management. Both required attention to detail, efficiency, and the ability to solve problems creatively. But it was the time spent with Max that she treasured most. Despite the demanding work of running the ranch, he made sure they had time together every day. Sometimes it was a morning ride to check on the cattle before the day grew too hot. Sometimes it was an evening walk after supper, strolling hand in hand through the fading light. Sometimes it was just quiet time in their sitting room, reading together or talking about their days. Max was a good husband, patient and attentive, always aware of her comfort and happiness. He taught her to ride better, took her to parts of the ranch she had never seen, and shared the work and the worries of the operation with her as a true partner. When she made mistakes, as she inevitably did in learning her new role, he was understanding and supportive rather than critical. Marcus gradually warmed to her as well. He was never effusive or overly friendly, but he began to seek out her opinion on household matters and occasionally on ranch business as well. She discovered that he valued practical thinking and was willing to listen to good ideas regardless of their source. By the time they had been married 6 months, he was treating her as a daughter rather than as an outsider who had invaded his family. In spring, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had watched her mother struggle through difficult pregnancies and knew the dangers that childbirth held for women, but Max's happiness was so complete that she could not help but be infected by his enthusiasm. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand resting on her still flat stomach as if he could feel the new life growing there. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Olivia continued to work around the house, though Margaret and Max both insisted she not overdo it. Marcus was quietly pleased at the prospect of a grandchild, and his gruff demeanor softened even further as Olivia's belly grew round. On a cool October afternoon, almost exactly a year after her wedding, Olivia went into labor. It was a long and difficult process, lasting through the night and into the next day, but she was young and healthy, and Margaret had assisted at enough births to know what to do. Max paced outside the bedroom door, not allowed in by custom and propriety but close enough to hear what was happening, his own face pale with fear and anticipation. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith on that October day, the high, thin wail of a newborn baby filled the house. Margaret opened the door, a tired but triumphant smile on her face, and announced, "You have a son, Max, a healthy boy." Max burst into the room where Olivia lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes to peer at his parents, green gold eyes that were unmistakably Donovan. "A son," Max breathed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The infant's fingers curled around Max's, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect. He is ours," Olivia said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Our beautiful surprise." They named him Matthew after Max's grandfather, and he became the center of their world. Marcus was a doting grandfather, his stern facade crumbling completely in the face of his grandson's toothless smiles. Margaret knitted blankets and clothes, sang lullabies, and declared Matthew the most beautiful baby she had ever seen. As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, and then to a sturdy little boy, the ranch prospered. Max proved to be an excellent rancher, combining his father's practical experience with new ideas and innovations that increased their yields and profits. Olivia managed the household with quiet efficiency, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the women of the community who had once looked down on her as an upstart. 3 years after Matthew's birth, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline after Max's mother. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, and Marcus wept the first time he held her, seeing in his granddaughter an echo of his beloved wife. 2 years after Caroline came another son, James. And then, when Olivia was 32 and thought they were finished having children, a surprise daughter they named Rose appeared. 4 children, each one loved and welcomed, each one a gift that Olivia never took for granted. The years passed in a blur of seasons. Hot summers spent checking on cattle and bringing in hay, cool autumns with harvest celebrations, cold winters spent close to the fire, and springs full of new calves and planting. The children grew, learned to ride, helped with the ranch work as they got older, and filled the house with noise and laughter. Marcus grew older and eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74, content in the knowledge that his ranch and his family were in good hands. They buried him next to Caroline on the rise overlooking the valley, and Olivia stood with her arm around Max as he said goodbye to his father. Their children gathered around them. Margaret stayed on until her own health began to fail, then retired to a small cottage on the ranch property where Olivia and the children visited her daily. She passed away when Matthew was 15, surrounded by the family she had helped to raise and loved as her own. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows, the hard times and the good times, Max kept his promise. He filled Olivia's life with beautiful surprises. A garden full of the flowers she had once dreamed of, trips to San Francisco to see the sights, small gifts and gestures that showed he was thinking of her, and most importantly, his steady, unwavering love and partnership. On their 25th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set over land that now belonged entirely to them, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her from that dusty stagecoach stop to this moment of contentment. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked Max, who was holding her hand in his thumb tracing idle patterns on her palm. "You told me you came to Redding expecting nothing," Max said with a smile, "and I told you that everything I gave you would be a beautiful surprise." "You kept that promise," Olivia said softly. "Every day for 25 years, you have surprised me with how good life can be. And I intend to keep surprising you for at least another 25, Max replied, leaning over to kiss her temple. "Maybe 50 if we are lucky." From inside the house came the sound of their children laughing about something, the familiar noise that had been the soundtrack of their life together. Matthew was 24 now, running much of the ranch operation and courting a nice girl from Sacramento. Caroline was 21 and engaged to a neighboring rancher's son. James, at 19, was considering studying law in San Francisco. And Rose, their youngest at 13, was still a child but showing signs of the strong, independent woman she would become. "We built something good here," Olivia said, looking out over the ranch that had become her home and her legacy. "Something lasting." "We did it together," Max corrected. "You and me, partner." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The life Olivia had built was so different from anything she could have imagined that day. She arrived in Redding, dusty and defeated and expecting nothing. She had learned that beautiful surprises were indeed possible, that hope was not foolish but necessary, and that love, real love, was the greatest surprise of all. In the years that followed, they watched their children marry and start families of their own. They welcomed grandchildren, 8 in total, who brought new energy and joy to the ranch. Max's hair turned from brown to gray to white, and Olivia found laugh lines around her eyes and threads of silver in her dark hair. But they faced aging together with the same partnership that had defined their entire marriage. On a cool morning in the spring when Olivia was 61 and Max was 69, they rode out together to the ridge where Max had proposed so many years ago. It was harder to make the climb now, their joints protesting the exertion, but they were both still vigorous and healthy, refusing to let age slow them down completely. They sat on the same spot where they had shared their first kiss, looking out over the valley that had been witness to their entire life together. "I would do it all again," Olivia said suddenly. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose this life, choose you, every single time." "Even that first night in Mrs. Henderson's cramped little room?" Max asked with a teasing smile. "Even that," Olivia confirmed, "because it led me here to you, to this life. That night I thought I had reached the bottom, that there was nothing ahead but gray days and hard work. I could not have been more wrong. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were meant for more than sewing other people's clothes in a dark little shop," Max said. "I just had to convince you of it." "You did more than that," Olivia said. "You taught me how to hope again, how to dream, how to believe that I deserved happiness. You gave me beautiful surprises every day, and the most beautiful surprise of all was discovering that I was capable of this much love." They sat together watching the hawks circle overhead and the cattle grazing in the distance until the sun climbed high in the sky and it was time to return to the ranch, to the life they had built, to the family that depended on them. Max helped Olivia onto her horse with the same gentle courtesy he had always shown her, and they rode back down the trail side by side, hands occasionally reaching out to clasp each other, connected by more than 50 years of shared life and love. In the end, they were granted their wish for a long life together. Max passed away in his sleep at the age of 81, with Olivia holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around. Olivia mourned him deeply, but without bitterness, grateful for the years they had been given rather than resentful of the time that remained to her without him. She lived another 7 years, staying active on the ranch with the help of Matthew and his family, maintaining the gardens she loved, and spending time with her grandchildren, and eventually her great-grandchildren. She read poetry every evening from the book Max had given her so long ago, its pages now yellowed and brittle but still precious. When her time came, she passed peacefully, surrounded by family at the age of 88. They buried her next to Max on the rise overlooking the valley, and the whole county turned out to pay their respects to the woman who had arrived in Redding expecting nothing, and had ended up building a legacy that would last for generations. On her gravestone, Matthew had inscribed words his father had spoken to his mother on the day they met. "She arrived expecting nothing. He said, 'Then everything I give you will be a beautiful surprise.' And beneath that, a final line, 'And so it was.'" The Donovan Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one carrying forward the values of hard work, partnership, and love that Max and Olivia had established. The children told their own children's stories about their grandparents, about how they had met and fallen in love, about the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the grass, people said you could see two figures riding together across the ridge, side by side, still connected by a love that had transformed both their lives and created something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. From the ashes of loss and disappointment, from a life lived expecting nothing, Olivia had found everything she never knew she needed. And in finding it, she had learned the most important lesson of all, that the willingness to hope, to take risks, to open yourself to possibility, is what makes life worth living. That beautiful surprises are always possible if you have the courage to believe in them. And that true love, when you find it, is the most beautiful surprise of all.